but there are certain limitations, and there's also a modesty aspect as well. So women don't take centre stage in the same sense.
Yeah.
But it's not. So, for example, in Jewish tradition,
Yeah.
a woman will wear a long skirt or long sleeves, right? She won't wear a sort of a close, tight top, or she won't wear a low neck. That's not to cover her up because there's something wrong with her. It's so that her inner beauty will shine out. A person shouldn't look at a woman and say, wow, she's got a gorgeous figure, and everyone's staring at somebody else's wife, or even somebody else's daughter, or just a single girl. That's not very nice. You know,
Yeah.
you really want everyone whistling at you. So if a person looks at it and says, what a beautiful lady, it should be because of her inner beauty shining through.
Yeah.
It's not about covering up and hiding away. We don't hide our women away. But it's certainly about modesty. Men also, though. Men aren't supposed to walk around in tight tops and no shirt either. So that's very central to Judaism. But it's not about hiding women away, God forbid. It's just about preserving the beauty and bringing out the inner beauty.
Yeah.
So that's the role of women in Judaism. Tremendous respect for the woman. In the marriage document, when a man and woman get married, there's a lot of obligations the man towards the woman, how he has to treat his wife. It's very much one-sided. So there's a lot of respect for women in Judaism as the homemaker and as the foundation of society and so on.
Yeah, what I mean, normally two types of in India, in some kind of Hindu people are following matriarchal system,
Right.
and some are following the patriarchal system.
Right.
Which type of families you are following? I mean, Jewish is following patriarchal or matriarchal system.
I think in the very traditional communities, the father would have been the head of the household. But I think that's not really...
Nowadays.
That doesn't say enough, because in many families both parents work, certainly. But certainly in more orthodox families it's quite common, at least when children are young, the mother will stay home. And if the mother's staying home, then, you know, she sets the tone in the house, you know, because she's the person that's going to have the most influence on the children.
Yeah.
And you know, we always say to people, you know, really the husband should respect the fact that the wife is the one who's being expected to raise the kids, at least for the first year or whatever. So, you know, maybe it's, and also women have a stronger bond in many ways. So it depends what. I like to think that things are partnership. Should be a partnership. Marriage is a partnership, you know.
Yeah, I mean equality, you treat us equal respect.
It's a male-dominated community in terms of the positions and the offices, and you know, it's the men that go to pray a few times a day during the week and so on. But there's a lot of equality in terms of opinion and I say opinion making and decision making and so on.
Yeah.
There should be anyway in a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
There certainly shouldn't be any submission or oppression of either party to a marriage.
Yeah. You mean you equally treated your woman in the home, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there is no domination, the male domination in the homes.
Absolutely not. And
No.
Jewish law is very strict about, for example, a husband can't. It says actually a wife can demand. She can make demands upon her husband in terms of fulfillment and marital needs. But he's got if he wants and she says no, then he has to respect that. There's tremendous respect for the woman in terms of the marital relationship and so on.
Well, once upon a time, around 500 years before, Christians Christians are accused. I mean, once upon a time, Christians accused that Jewish were blood labels, usury, and aliens. Do you think the people's attitude have been changed nowadays?
Well, generally yes. Unfortunately, you still come across from time to time. In Egypt, they printed something called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a famous forgery, which was basically a whole conspiracy about how the Jews are taking over the world banking system and so on. The blood libels have no basis in fact at all. The only thing you could possibly say is that they used red wine at Passover. So somebody decided it would be, you know, somebody made up a story one day that they were using the blood of Christian children. And then it actually happened one day that the Christian child had died or something, and before you know it, the Jews were being blamed. You know, and the phrase blood libel.
Even the plague was break out here.
There's the famous case of Dreyfus, Alfred Dreyfus, who was a lieutenant in the French army, who was accused of all kinds of things. Unfortunately, it's happened throughout history. You know, again, it's persecution, it's jealousy. I don't know what it is. There was no basis in fact anywhere. The only thing that I could possibly say to be charitable is that if maybe people read about animal sacrifices in the Bible, there's no talk of child sacrifice anywhere. You know, but it was completely fabricated. But unfortunately, from time to time, you see, you know, particularly in the Middle East, where the media is not so free, or Western, you know, you see examples of, you still see examples sometimes in the Arab media of sort of Nazi-style cartoons about, you know, portraying Jews as hook-nosed with horns, and you know, you see these things unfortunately. There was a TV program done a few years ago called Anti-Semitism, the Longest Hatred, because it's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
They went to villages in Poland which haven't seen a Jew for 60 years because they killed them all after the war. And they asked people about Jews, oh, they're creatures with horns and, they're evil creatures. And I was like, aren't these people living in the 21st century? Do they realise, we're like everybody else? So, it still goes on, but a lot of it's ignorance as well.
Yeah. Recently in Iran, Ahmadinejad, the president, ordered that all the Jewish are wearing the yellow badges.
I heard this.
Yeah, I read that. I mean, in such a way that the discrimination is ongoing in nowadays as well. But in the European society, the liberal society, I think that attitude is changed now.
So if you'd asked me, as a religious Jew and therefore a conservative person in terms of family values and morality and so on, I don't really like all the sort of free love that goes on in society. I'm not a big fan of all the immodesty which we see on our advertising and on TV. But if you would ask me, as a religious Jew, as a rabbi, as an Orthodox Jew, would I prefer to live in a Western democracy? Would I prefer to live in if you like, an autocratic religious society? I prefer to live in a Western democracy, because the same democracy that gives freedom to people to be secular gives me my freedom to practice my religion. And we've seen what happens in places where you don't have that democracy. So I'd much rather live in a Western democracy with all its disadvantages than in some kind of dictatorship, which might be more religious in nature, but it's quite frightening.
Yeah.
So, for all its faults, I mean, I know I said earlier we prospered and flourished more perhaps in the Middle Eastern society, but you look at the world today, it's a lot easier, obviously, to be a Jew in Western society. Now, that brings challenges as well.
Yeah.
There's greater assimilation.
Yeah.
The community is, and just for example, we were talking before about intermarriage. If you go back to Europe 100 years ago, intermarriage wasn't an issue because the Jews were treated like vermin.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted to marry a Jew. Who wanted to marry somebody who lived in a ghetto that was, condemned to death.
Yeah.
Nowadays,
I seen the ghettos.
This type of thing, so that actually, the assimilation, the greater freedom brings with it challenges in terms of religious observance.
Yeah.
People say, well, I need all this stuff, or I can be like all the other British people. I don't need to wear a kippah, I don't need to eat kosher, I don't need to marry someone Jewish, I don't need to raise my kids to believe in Judaism. It's a great challenge.
Yeah.
The greatest challenges of today is secularism in Western society. But we have physical freedom, which is not to be sneezed at.
Yeah. Because you are threatening your religious values in the
But the truth is,
the liberal society.
This is a challenge that many, particularly immigrant communities face.
Yeah, not only that.
Your own community, I'm sure, is a more conservative
Yeah.
society. I had a friend who was an Indian Braham, is that what do they call him? Braham, from the what do they call him? Braham, is that the caste?
You mean?
No, a friend of mine was
yeah.
Braham, is that what they call him?
Abraham, yeah.
Yeah. So he was saying he grew up in a much more conservative culture.
Yeah.
And to come to Britain where there's much more freedom of, belief and alcohol and sex and drugs and, was a big culture shock for him.
Yeah, our communities also, our communities, the major portion of our communities thinking about their future in here is very dangerous because the people the children's here growing with the drugs and some illegal activities. That's why in our community is also
I don't know what
the same problem.
You would call it. We refer to it as assimilation.
Yeah.
Because you're basically assimilating into the culture around you.
Yeah.
And it's the greatest the challenge of 100 years ago was to physically survive.
Yeah.
In Europe.
Yeah.
The challenge of today is to spiritually survive.
Spiritually, yeah. But the problem not in Europe, in Israel recently. The Jewish Orthodox, Jewish Orthodox community fighting with the liberals in Israel.
Right, so there's a big problem in Israel now.
Yeah, and the government is ordered to conquer, defeat the ultra conservative communities. And in the Israel is also facing the same problem.
So my beliefs are ultra-Orthodox beliefs, are very strict Torah beliefs, but I also believe in love of my fellow Jew and fellow mankind and so on. So if somebody's doing something wrong, you don't throw stones at them and you don't yell at them. So we try to embrace people with love and show them the beauty of Judaism rather than attacking them, which never achieved anything. You have a society which has many, many thousands of very strong, devout believers, and a very small minority, and it is a small minority. It's the same few people, unfortunately, that keep popping up. But unfortunately, like anything, they make the headlines. The Israeli government has its own problems. It has to appease different political... Because it's a coalition system.
Yeah,
it's very similar to Italy. So you get this stalemate in Parliament, in the Knesset, where you've got little parties with three members.
But
they have tremendous swing in the coalition. So they're constantly having to appease their coalition partners. So a lot of it's political, and religion's become very politicized in Israel as well. It's very sad. Listen, a lot of Israelis are secular and don't believe. They're not going to become more religious because of people throwing stones at them, that's for sure. There is a legitimate argument going on there. The ultra-Orthodox feel their needs are not being met. They feel they're living in a Jewish country and there's no sympathy for their needs. Some of their needs are very extreme, possibly, but dialogue would obviously be preferable to violence.
It's better for find out the solution.
But, you know, you've got a lot of people with very strong opinions. Israelis have had a very tough...
Recently I read
60 years, and it's made them very tough. And Israelis can be very, you know, tough, and therefore they can be quite outspoken and assertive. And, you know, I'm very fond of my many Israeli friends, but a part of the national character is to speak your mind, right? And to be very, you know, sort of like outspoken, if you like, and very different from British people. You know, British people are very reserved. They don't say, Israelis will tell you like it is. They don't take any nonsense. Because they've had to grow up with that. So you have a lot of people with very strong opinions shouting at each other. Now, unfortunately, sometimes it's very rare to have internal violence, and it's a terrible, terrible thing.
As far as
you should know that in my if you like, my culture of Orthodox belief, the idea of raising your hand to another person was always treated with dread. Okay, one of the reasons perhaps that the Jewish people, if you go back 60 years, I don't know, was seen as victims, is that there was never a culture of violence in Judaism. There was never a culture of being tough. It just didn't go with the idea of raising your hand to another person who was created in the image of God, and of striking a person or of attacking a person, even to defend yourself, was just anathema to Jewish belief. So when somebody's threatening somebody, I mean, there was a picture of somebody who looks a bit like me.
I see that.
And he had his fist raised, and people said
they
were in tears. They were in tears to see this. They said, "This is not how Jews should look."
Okay.
So it's a very small minority, and they need to be condemned. And it's very sad they made the headlines. A very important part of our belief is what we call Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem. We're in a minority, and the Torah tells us and recognizes that we're in the spotlight because we're in a minority, and because we might be the chosen people, whether we like it or not. You know, we're seen as representing some higher standard, and it's true, that's how the world looks. Why is Israel always being criticized? Because the world says Israel should know better. What about why isn't Sudan criticized? Why isn't Libya criticized? Why isn't Saudi Arabia or Syria criticized? Israel's always criticized because somehow people expect more from them. I guess it's a compliment, right? So Kiddush Hashem means that when my actions lead to a person saying, you know, I don't know, if I step on someone's toe in public and I say, I'm terribly sorry, you know, can I help you or whatever, and I say, oh, what a nice young man, you know, and they go away and say, you know, he had a kippah, I think he was a religious Jew, might have been a rabbi, you know, what a nice man. Isn't it nice when religious people behave like that? That's called a Kiddush Hashem, it's sanctifying God's name. Because a person says, hey, you know what, maybe it's not such a bad thing, religion. A Chilul Hashem is when you desecrate God's name. So if a rabbi is arrested for a crime, and people see it on TV, they say, more religious fanatics.
Fanatics.
I
feel that the same.
What I need God for, So it desecrates God's name. So unfortunately, when you see somebody throwing a stone, or you see somebody shouting, or being abusive, or spitting at an 8-year-old girl, this causes a tremendous Chilul Hashem, we call it. Which is one of the worst things you can do. Doesn't matter what your justification is. If your actions bring about bad publicity, essentially. If my actions bring about, you know, listen, it's a normal thing. You know, sometimes when you're in your car and you're driving, and someone cuts in front of you, you might swear. It's not the best thing to do, but people do it. You say words you shouldn't say. You know, I'm a rabbi, I have a beard, I have a kippah, and if I'm going to shout out my window some swear word, and a person's going to say, this is how a rabbi should behave, it's a Chilul Hashem, it desecrates God's name. So we have to be careful how we behave the whole time. That's what I believe. Not just me, that's...
I mean, your attitude is fully liberal. I mean, your attitude is a liberal towards the society, or conservative...
liberal towards society, conservative in values. But we believe that we have to engage society. The way we're going to convince... How am I going to convince... There's a lot of Jewish people that don't believe in Judaism, or that don't keep the laws, or that don't study, or are not connected to their roots. How am I going to connect them? With love or with hate?
Love.
With love, okay. So if I show them tolerance and understanding and appreciation, I say, you're an adult, I'm not going to force feed you Judaism, I'm going to put it on the table in front of you in a nice way, we'll study, we'll have a positive experience, we'll have a nice service on a Saturday morning. They used to say, I belong to a sect which is called Chabad, Lubavitch, Hasidim.